And we see this a lot in the online community. There's a common and consistent complaint from people who are involved in social justice discussions, who feel as though they're being treated unfairly. They're being accused of being a racist or a misogynist or a something unfairly, just because they were just asking questions, or just because of this, or just because of that. This happens a lot. And I want to take a minute, or more than a minute, to kind of flip that on its head with the help of Mr. Bill Murray.
So Columbus is the scared one?
Yeah. He's like a little bunny.
I'll get him.
Sorry, I should pause here. Is there anyone who hasn't seen the movie Zombieland before? Okay, I'm gonna set up this clip. Zombie apocalypse, and 4 travelers who don't know each other have made it to California. They're looking for refuge there. They stop at Bill Murray's house because they're all fans, assuming that he's dead, like pretty much everyone else. It turns out Bill Murray's not dead. He's very much alive, and he sometimes dresses up as a zombie so that he can go to the grocery store and get food. So, Bill Murray is now going to have a fun prank. Let's watch what happens.
So Columbus is the scared one?
Yeah. He's like a little bunny.
I'll get him. What's this?
No, it's okay. It's okay. I got him.
Is that how you say hello? Where you coming from?
Oh my god. Oh my god, I can't believe I shot Bill Murray.
Mr. Murray.
Bill, I think no.
So, let's break that scene down for a minute, according to the 2 perspectives that we have. Bill knows he's not a zombie. He knows that he's not any threat. And he thinks it's a funny joke. He thinks that it's a totally benign thing that he's doing. That he'll get him a little scare, and then we'll all have a laugh and eat some popcorn or whatever. So he's walking into the situation thinking there's absolutely no danger. Columbus, on the other hand, has a slightly different thought process when he sees Bill walk into the room. And he does something that is entirely logical. Given everything that has happened to him up until that moment in his life, he reacts completely rationally by shooting Bill Murray in the chest. And there's a parallel to be drawn between what it means to be a minority in a majority culture. That members of minority groups, many members of minority groups, certainly not universal, but we have lots of experience facing and recognizing discrimination. And it often comes from people who sound well-intentioned. And in fact, sometimes that's the worst kind, because you let your guard down and then someone does something or says something that's discriminatory, and it hurts even more because you weren't ready for it. It can be psychologically harmful. It can be socially harmful to be embarrassed racially in front of a group of people. And so in those kinds of cases, a lot of the times, an underreaction where you're not on your guard can be more dangerous to you than an overreaction, or an overreaction. So what I'm going to try to do in this next section is pass on what I do when I'm entering a minority space and I end up saying or doing something that someone else identifies as being whateverist. The first thing to do is to listen. The number one, the trademark, hallmark, definition sine qua non of trolling is that people do not listen to what other people are saying. If you can show that you were in that space to learn rather than to teach people why their reaction to racism or why their reaction to whatever is irrational and off the wall and doesn't make any sense, you're going to have a much easier time walking your statements back. The second thing is to try and stay relaxed. Racism is a topic where there is a lot of emotional content, and tempers can run really hot. Being accused of racism, or so I have been told, is one of the worst things imaginable. And if you react to someone saying, hey, that thing that you did is racist, by saying, hey, fuck you, I'm not a racist, that's not helping you or your cause at all. In fact, the people who go on to say extra racist things tend to react really defensively to accusations of racism, more so than people who just, oops, I made a mistake. Tip number 3, this is just a good tip for life, is to recognize that there's a chance that you are wrong. Members of minority groups when they identify something as racist, you might want to trust that they might know a bit more about the thing than you do. They have a different experience of the world, they have more experience with this topic than you might. Tip number 4, assume that you're not telling them anything that they don't already know. There's a really good chance that the 5 minutes that you've spent thinking about why affirmative action is reverse racism is less time than they've spent experiencing racism and understanding how it works. So there's a pretty good chance that they've had that conversation before, they've heard your opinions before, and they've ignored or dismissed or debunked your opinions before. So you know when creationists walk into scientists and they say, you know, like, fine, evolution, it's a nice story, but let's face it, how come there are still monkeys? These are people who assume that they've just magically figured it out, and everyone else will go, oh my god, you're right, monkeys! We've been wasting our time. No, people have heard this before. It's most of the things that you hear in racial conversations are incredibly stereotypical. So assume that you're not bringing a new and fresh insight into the conversation. Tip number 5, prepare to be insulted. Prepare to get blasted in the chest. You've got to just realize that that's part of the consequence of entering minority spaces. And again, remember why that's happening. It's not happening because they're overreacting. It's happening because they're reacting appropriately given their history. Tip number 6, try not to respond to insults. If it's possible, if they're insulting something that you have said or done, try to take it as constructive criticism of your opinion. If you can't, if the insult is directed at you personally rather than something that you've done, do your best. I realize this is asking a lot, but do your best to see them rather as a warning sign instead of a chance for you to settle the score by firing back. Tip number 7 is to point out areas where you and the person who's upset with you agrees. You know, this is a key step towards moving forward, and if that's what you want to do, if you want to understand what it is that's happened, what it is that you've said that might be incorrect or hurtful, establishing a common ground is a key step, because then they know where they can start walking you through if that's what they're interested in doing. It also often to help turn down the temperature of conversations when you can say, we are on the same side, at least on these issues. Number 8 is to admit when and that you have made a mistake. An apology is often all that people are looking for when they accuse you of saying or doing something racist. Usually, what they're looking for is a recognition that you understand that you did something wrong, that you acknowledge that what you did hurt them or can be hurtful to people, that you feel bad, that you've hurt people, which I think is normal unless you're a sociopath, and some understanding of how you're going to avoid doing that in the future. I recently published a blog post in which I made a really careless and lazy joke about people who believe this thing, it doesn't really matter what the thing was. I said that people who believe that probably shouldn't be allowed to leave the house without a helmet. Now I thought it was funny until a number of my readers, many of whom had epilepsy, many of whom had family members who had developmental disabilities, or who themselves had developmental disabilities, pointed out to me, that's actually an incredibly hurtful thing to say. And so this is the apology that I gave. I said, you know, I shouldn't have said that. It was the wrong thing to say. I now understand that joke, while seeming funny, is actually incredibly hurtful. I'm sorry that I did that. I shouldn't have done that. And I will be much more careful when I make jokes about that can be construed in that way in the future. I didn't have to rend my clothing and cover myself in sackcloth and ashes. I didn't have to pay money. I didn't have to, slice my face with razor blades and pour iodine into the wounds, or anything that people seem to be afraid of when they're asked to apologize for something. Nothing bad happened. In fact, I got a lot of, I think, undeserved kudos from people who said, that was a good apology. So sometimes you can make friends by being a dick and then feeling bad about it. Tip number 9, be prepared to walk away from these conversations. Not every conversation is going to end with people holding hands under a rainbow. A lot of them don't. A lot of times, racial hurt goes very, very deep. And there is no one conversation where people are going to be willing to move you all the way through. If you're not making any progress, if you follow the preceding tips and you're still not getting anywhere, be prepared to walk away. But don't walk away in the, well, you're just irrational and I don't have time to deal with your nonsense. The best way to walk away is to admit that you just aren't getting it yet. Even if you don't believe that. I hope that you do, but even if you don't, the best way to do it is to say, I need some time to think this over on my own because I must not be getting it. I hope we can continue this conversation another time. And then let it go. Walk away. And the number 10 tip really is just to be honest. I mean, be honest with the people who you're talking to. Don't twist their words, screw around with their arguments, make them out to be saying something that they're obviously not saying. But also be honest with yourself about your intentions. What is the outcome that you're looking for in this conversation? What is it that you are trying to do? What is the win condition for you? Figure out what that means. Because until we learn to examine ourselves as well as each other, it's going to be very difficult for us to make progress. So,
Can I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
So I know we have issues in our group, usually with talking about feminism, and there's an argument. So my natural inclination is towards your kind of thing with the tips, but there's also an argument that people give where it's actually beneficial to shame people. That really it's actually a good idea in certain circumstances to shame people for being racist or sexist or whatever it is. And do you have any? What would you say to that? I mean, do you have any kind? Is this just your sort of intuition about how people should behave?
So these tips are for when you are in the majority and you're in a minority space. So if you're saying that feminism is not an appropriate topic of conversation, that feminists are shrill harpies who need to get back in the kitchen, if that's the position that you're taking into the conversation, but you think that you might be wrong about that for some odd reason, then those tips are for how you can have a productive conversation without everyone trying to kill you with a shotgun. As far as shaming people goes, I personally am not a fan of it, but I'm also very wary of there is a group of people in the world, in the realm of conversations, who make the claim that there is a best way, a right way to resolve conflicts. And that if both sides start to play by the same rules, then everything will be fine. So don't say things that are misogynistic, and don't call people misogynists, and then everyone will be happy. Well, I think the power is a bit lopsided there. So I'm hesitant to say don't shame people because I'm not comfortable when people get shamed. But I think in any interaction, if you are trying to accomplish something, you've got to figure out what it is that you're trying to do. What is it that you're trying to get out of the interaction? There are many occasions when, rather than holding someone's hand and walking them through why their argument is wrong, I just go straight to insult. Because at that point, I don't want anything from them. I don't care if they get it right or not. A lot of times they're just random people who, float through the internet and say something stupid. I don't have that kind of time. I don't have that kind of energy. Other times, if it's people who I have relationships with, people who I have a history with, or if I'm trying to teach a third party who I think might be watching the conversation, then I will moderate my tone, I'll take a different course. So I would say that I don't think that shaming people is entirely off the table, but there has to be a pretty good justification for it, and I don't know what that justification would be, because I don't think that I've ever I've ever had an experience where I think, what I need is for this person to be reviled by others. And I don't know when that would happen, but it might. Does that answer you? Okay.